You know, when you picture the most powerful and resilient structures in nature, I'm talking about the heartwood of a giant sequoia or the tough shell of a beetle, what do you imagine they're made of? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, and honestly, a little sweet. They're built from sugar.
So let's start with a little puzzle. Think about a starchy potato, the hard, armored shell of a lobster, and the very wood in the furniture around you. I mean, on the surface, they couldn't be more different, right? But deep down at a molecular level, they all share a secret.
And that secret is this. They are all absolute masterworks of molecular architecture, and they're all constructed from the same fundamental building block, simple sugars. It's kind of like nature is the ultimate minimalist architect, using just one simple ingredient to create a mind-boggling variety of materials.
Okay, so the official scientific term for these things is polysaccharides, or sometimes you'll hear glycans. Now that sounds complicated, but trust me, it's not. Poly just means many, and saccharide is just a fancy word for sugar. So polysaccharides, they're just long chains of repeating sugar units all linked together like beads on a string. That's it.
Now, in the biological world, these long sugar chains have basically evolved to solve two of life's biggest problems. The first is storing energy, how to pack away fuel for later, and the second is building stuff, how to create strong, stable structures to live in. So you've got fuel versus framework.
And this brings us to one of the most important rules in all of biology. Structure dictates function. The exact shape of a molecule, its arrangement, determines what it can do. A tiny little twist or a different kind of link can completely change its destiny.
All right, let's tackle that first problem, energy. Every living cell needs a way to store fuel for a rainy day. But as we're about to see, just having a bunch of sugar floating around inside you is actually a very dangerous game.
So here's the critical problem a cell faces. If a cell just filled itself up with thousands of individual glucose molecules, a process called osmosis would cause water to rush in to try and balance things out. The cell would swell up and literally explode. The solution? It's elegant. It's called polymerization. Just link all those sugars together into one giant, stable molecule.
For plants, their solution is starch. What they do is link their glucose units together with something called an alpha-linkage. Now, this specific type of bond makes the whole chain naturally coil up into a tight helix. And this is just brilliant. It lets the plant pack a huge amount of energy into a tiny, stable space. Think back to that potato from our first question.
But for us animals, the challenge is a little different. We need quick bursts of energy, for running from a predator or chasing down a meal. Our solution is a molecule called glycogen. It's also a polymer of glucose, and we store it in our liver and muscles. Structurally, it looks a lot like starch, but there's one crucial difference.
And you can really see that difference here. Glycogen, on the right, is way more branched than the starch you find in plants. So why does that matter? Well, the enzymes that release glucose for energy can only work on the ends of a chain. More branches mean more ends, and more ends mean you can release a flood of sugar into your bloodstream almost instantly. It's totally designed for speed.
Okay, so we figured out the energy problem. But what about building things? How on earth can nature use the exact same glucose monomer, not as a soft, digestible fuel, but as a material with the strength of wood?
The answer, it turns out, is all in changing the way the sugars are linked together and making a few tiny chemical tweaks. It's all about transforming that soft fuel source into a high-performance building material, like the fibers you see right here.
It all comes down to one simple, almost impossibly small change in the molecule's geometry. A single flip that changes absolutely everything.
And here it is. Remember that alpha linkage in starch? It creates that flexible coil, which is super easy for our enzymes to break down for energy. But flip that bond into what's called a beta linkage, and you get cellulose. The molecule suddenly becomes a straight, rigid rod. Our bodies can't digest it, we just call it fiber, but for a plant, it's a construction girder.
Because these cellulose chains are perfectly straight, they can line up right next to each other, nice and neat. And then they form this massive network of hydrogen bonds between the chains, essentially locking themselves together into these incredibly strong, cable-like structures. This is what gives wood its strength and makes cotton so tough.
Okay, so what if you need armor instead of a girder? Nature makes another tiny little tweak. You take cellulose and you just swap one small chemical group for another. The result is a new material called chitin. It's still a strong fiber, but this one little change makes it waterproof, which is perfect for an insect's exoskeleton or a lobster's shell.
Bacteria take this idea even further with their cell walls, which are made of something called peptidoglycan. In this case, long polysaccharide chains are laid side by side, and then they're stitched together with short little protein links. This creates a single, continuous, net-like molecule that's incredibly strong and wraps around the entire cell for protection. It's so crucial, in fact, that antibiotics like penicillin work by stopping these cross-links from ever forming.
So as we've seen, from energy to armor, from fuel to fiber, the final role of one of these polysaccharides is completely determined by its structure. You could say that for these molecules, structure is destiny.
Let's just put it all together. You can see this really clear divide, right? Over on the energy side, you've got starch and glycogen with their easily accessible coiled alpha-linkages. And then on the structural side, you have cellulose and chitin with their rigid hydrogen-bonded beta fibers and peptidoglycan with its unique protein crosslinks.
And this right here is really the main takeaway. The world of polysaccharides shows us a fundamental principle of biology, that profound complexity and diversity can come from the absolute simplest of starting points. A tiny change in a bond angle, the number of branches, or a single chemical tweak, and you can transform a simple sugar into either a fast-access fuel or a structural material of incredible strength. So from the energy in a potato to the armor on a beetle, these unseen architects are building and powering the entire living world. It really proves that amazing complexity can arise from the simplest starting points, all based on just a few simple rules, which kind of leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? What other simple rules might be out there, quietly governing the incredible complexity we see all around us?